Should you be a Luffy main into One Piece TCG? Let's talk about it. What's up, captains? Welcome back to The Other Decks. My name is Casual Dobo, and today we're going to be discussing the Red Luffy Starter Deck that's coming out for the One Piece TCG. Now, as you know, the One Piece TCG's super pre-release is literally just around the corner at the time of this recording, about 2 weeks away, and that means we're going to have our starter deck tournaments as well as starter deck meta. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I did do a video covering all of the events that are happening before the release of the first set, OP01 Romance Dawn, which you can check out right up here. But essentially the coming months are all going to be about the starter decks. So I did want to do sort of a analysis and breakdown of each of the starter decks that's coming out. So Red Luffy, Green Kid, Blue Crocodile, and Purple Kaido. But essentially I want to analyze them from the standpoint of both strength out of the box for all the tournaments that are happening for super pre-release, as well as upgradability and how many meta cards there are in the deck. And then once I cover all of them, I'm going to do another video talking about which ones I think are going to do the best in the super pre-release. But if you're excited for all of this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification. That way you'll know when the videos come out. And if you're enjoying this video or finding that this video is pretty helpful, consider giving it a like. And while you're down there, let me know in the comments down below which starter deck you think is either the best or your favorite. Would love to hear from you. But I think that'll do it for my intro, so let's just go ahead and jump right into the breakdown. Alright, and here we are. And the question I want to start off with is why you should play Red Luffy, the Straw Hats starter deck. One, if you're looking for aggro plays, this is the starter deck for you. This is probably the most aggressive of the 4 starter decks coming out, and that's primarily thanks to its abilities like Rush and also ignoring blockers, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Another reason you might want to play this, if you like the Straw Hats, obviously this is an anime-centric card game, and Luffy and the Straw Hats are our protagonists. If you're huge fans of them, then you'll definitely want to get the starter deck, especially the special pre-release version, just because those will be marked with that super pre-release stamp, so they're just a little bit more rare than the traditional starter decks that will be coming out in December. And then lastly, and I think this goes into aggro plays a little bit, but if you like playing risky but fast, this is a starter deck for you. Now let's talk about the primary keywords that you can expect, the strengths and the weaknesses of this deck. So primarily what you're looking at is our rush abilities. So for those of you who don't know, in the One Piece trading card game, when you first play a character, which is like your monsters or Digimon from other card games. Digimon's pretty specific, but they cannot attack on the turn that they are first summoned. However, with Rush, it kind of bypasses that and it allows that character to attack on the first turn it's out. And so that means even if your opponent has spent time clearing your board, if you have enough Dawn, which is the energy resource system we have in One Piece, if you have enough Dawn, you can play out your rushers and still attack and aggress and potentially get the win off of that strategy. And in terms of a secondary ability, we do seem to have this sort of theme of ignoring blockers. So cards like Usopp and Rush Luffy have abilities that inherently make it so that your opponent can't activate their blocker abilities. And we also have something very similar in the event card Diable Jambe. The other thing we have introduced here, which isn't really present in some of the other starter decks, is targeted removal. And this comes in the form of Jet Pistol. Jet Pistol is an incredibly powerful event card, and well, unfortunately in the starter deck, one individual box, there only is 2 copies, but we'll talk about the ratios and all of the numbers of cards in the deck later on in the video. But I think the coolest ability here is what I'm referring to as Dawn Flexibility. If you've seen my video on how to play the One Piece TCG, or honestly anyone else's, because there's a ton of awesome content creators out there making some awesome videos, if you've seen any of their videos, you'll know that typically if you have active Dawn, you can attach that onto characters. But in order to use Dawn to summon things, you do need to tap it, and so there's almost like binary sort of decision making when it comes to their Dawn, right? In most cases. Either you activate it to do cool things, or you attach it onto your characters so that they can hit harder. So after you've played your cards, used your Dawn, you can actually take that tapped Dawn and then attach it to other things based on some of the abilities we have. So that allows you to not only play your characters, but also power up your characters who are available to attack. Now, let's talk about some of the weaknesses here. So, weakness, lack of counters. It's kind of wild how many counters are in this, and we'll talk about it in the sort of stats. But spoiler alert, it's kind of low, to be honest. That and Chopper is our only blocker. Out of all of the starter decks, this is the only one that has one blocker, I believe, which is kind of wild. So that's why I say, like, if you want something that plays fast but risky, this is the starter deck for you. Now, jumping into those stats, let's take a look at our Dawn curve. So we're operating kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, right? So 16 1 costs, 16 2 costs, 10 3 costs, 5 4 costs, and then 2 5 costs. So yeah, the curve is like way skewed towards the lower end. And that's because a lot of our utility characters, such as Nami, such as Chopper, are 1 costs. And really the only huge character that we're going to be playing from the starter deck is going to be our Rush Luffy, which is the 2 5 cost that's there. Now, like I said, the number of counters in here is kind of low. It's 28. You know, if you look forward into potential meta decks, a lot of them are running, you know, kind of like 32, 36 counters. And those that don't have counters typically have some sort of other ability, whether it's utility, on-play effects, etc. I mean, even if you compare it to just out-of-the-box starter decks, this is the lowest number by far. And I think this is where the starter deck kind of struggles, right? It is fast. It can hit you so hard, but it cannot survive, at least not as presently presented. And I think the worst part about that number of counters is the fact that of the 28 of them, only 2, count them, 2, are 2k counters. Only having 2 of them in 28 counters? Kind of wild. Alright, so now that we've talked about the stats, let's actually talk about the key cards and strategies of the deck. So, first of all, let's take a look at Luffy. Alright, so Monkey D. Luffy is your leader card, mono red, 5 life, so you can put 5 cards into your life area, and then 5,000 power. Pretty standard, traditional for a monocolored leader. Now, its ability is activate main once per turn, so you can just choose to do this, don't need to pay anything. Give this leader or one of your characters 1 rested Dawn card. So here's a little bit of that Dawn flexibility that I talked about earlier. This allows you to, you know, use that 1 Dawn to play something like a Chopper, a Nami, and then you can go ahead and put it onto, you know, Luffy himself or one of your other characters. Next card I want to talk about is Nami. So Nami is 1 cost, 1k power. You're not really going to be using it for any attacks. Does have counter plus 1000, so it's a very good card. However, her ability is even better. Activate main once per turn, give your leader or one of your characters 1 rested Dawn. So exact copy of the Luffy leader card, but in character form. But this allows you to, you know, utilize a second Dawn in the same way you would with your Luffy leader. And that can enable some wild plays, especially since a lot of the effects of the other character cards you have in the starter deck do require 1 Dawn, or in some cases 2, like the combo I'm about to talk about. So for this one, I'm going to be calling this the Brook Sanji combo. That's because they have some pretty good synergy together. So Sanji is a 2 cost to play, 4,000 power, but Dawn times 2, so you need to attach 2 Dawn onto him. This character gains rush for the turn. Now, if you take a look at Brook, Brook is 2 cost to play, 3,000 power, counter plus 2,000, so this is a very good card. This only comes as a 2 of in this deck, but on play, give your leader or one of your characters 2 rested Dawn. So essentially on turn 2, if you're to go second, you have 4 Dawn available. You can play the Sanji for 2, and then play Brook for 2, and then giving the 2 rested Dawn onto Sanji, allowing him to attack. And we're actually going to hop into Tabletop Simulator to kind of check out some of these combos I'm talking about. Next card I wanted to highlight is actually Rush Luffy himself. So 5 cost to play, 6,000 power, has Rush inherently, no shenanigans, no nothing. You can just play him and attack. But Dawn times 2, when attacking, your opponents can't activate blocker for this battle. Please note that this says for the battle, so it is for this one instance of battle, and not the turn. But we've already seen a couple ways they can add 2 Dawn onto him while you know, having it rested, active, whatever you have it. But the ability for your opponent to not activate blocker whatsoever is pretty powerful. So people will typically use this when your opponent has 0 life and attempt to swing for game. And at 6k power, it is above what I call a natural attacker. Natural attacker being 5 because that is the amount of power that leaders have nowadays. Whether that changes in the future, who knows? But 6k is enough to swing over them pretty easily and, force their hand to either counter with at least plus 2k. And then finally, the last card I wanted to talk about individually is Jet Pistol. So Jet Pistol is an event card, 4 cost to play, but main ability, KO one of your opponent's characters with 6,000 power or less, which is super powerful and hits a lot of the major things, especially in the starter deck meta. Also has a trigger ability, so if it comes out of life, you can activate the card's main effect without having to pay it on, which is cool. But yeah, this is Red's strongest form of targeted removal, and is going to be a pretty important card moving on past the starter deck meta. So now that we talked about the key cards and sort of strategies of the starter deck, let's go ahead to Tabletop Simulator and look at these things in action. Alright, and here we are at Tabletop Simulator, and as you can see from my hand, I typically try and do mulligan for Nami, right? Because she unlocks a lot of that flexibility that allows me to, use my Dawn in multiple ways. So Nami or Chopper really aren't bad turn 1 plays. But the combo I want to show here is actually the Brooks Sanji combo. So here I have 4 Dawn, it's my turn, and I have Brook and Sanji in hand. So for 2, I'm going to go ahead and play Sanji. And then for 2, I'm going to go ahead and play Brooks. So Brook on playability, I'll add the 2 Dawn that I use for either of them honestly, and then put that onto Sanji. And now Sanji has a rush and can swing freely. Now here's a little bit of a word of warning for the super pre-release and potentially, even further in the deck limited battles. Don't overuse this, right? While this is a great combo, keep in mind that out of the box, if you're using this at the super pre-release, you only have 2 Brook cards in the deck out of the box, and he's your 2k counter. Counters are pretty important in this game, and so using your 2k counter to put it onto the field, leaving you with potentially 1 or 0 in hand, is kind of risky. Really, I would only recommend this if, 1, you can get the win off of the Brook or Sanji combo, or if it's early in the match, like turn 2 or turn 3, because there's not a whole lot of powerful things swinging into your leader at that time. And then hopefully the rush combo can give you a little bit more advantage to kind of put you ahead in the game. So those are the key combos, but now I want to show you all of the starter deck. So here are the ratios. Right now we have 1 leader Luffy, you can only have 1 leader, 4 copies of Chopper, so 4 of your sort of chump blockers, 4 Nami, which is the utility play, 4 copies of Usopp. Unfortunately, he's one of those characters that does get easily replaced once we go into, set 1. 4 copies of Karoo, who is awesome, but it's just a 1 cost 3k attacker. You'll see a lot of these in the starter deck. 2 copies of Brook, so 2 2k counters. 4 Sanji, which is pretty cool. 4 Vivi, which is just under a natural attacker, but if you're to use, leader Luffy's ability, put 1 Rested Dawn onto Vivi, she becomes a potent attacker. Next up, 4 copies of Jinbei, 4 copies of Robin, 2 copies of Zoro, who's a powerful attacker when used correctly, but no counter potential, which is kind of rough. 4 copies of Frankie, 4 cost 6k attacker. The 6k attackers in the starter deck meta, very underutilized. Put them onto the field, why don't you? And then 2 copies of Rush Luffy. In terms of our event cards, got 2 copies of Guard Point, 2 copies of Diable Jambe, 2 copies Jet Pistol, and then something we haven't really talked about, 2 copies of the stage card, the Thousand Sunny. But that is the starter deck out of the box as a whole, just to kind of give you a good picture of what we're working with. And so now that we've covered all of that, let's talk about my concluding thoughts. So, power out of the box, 2 out of 5. Yes, Rush is a very strong ability, but honestly, there's not enough built into the starter deck out of the box for it to be too threatening in tournament situations. Yes, it can catch some people off guard if they're not expecting him. And, we don't know what these tournaments are going to be, but assuming it's going to follow how Digimon does it, where it's a best of 3, in a best of 3, this thing probably is not going to catch people off guard too many times. The reason for the downgrades and sort of its, ranking is because of lack of counters, only has 28, and 2 of them are 2Ks, so not even 4. Doesn't have a secondary blocker, which, early game meta for One Piece, and we saw this a little bit with Digimon, right, for those who are playing that early. The meta tends to be blocker heavy, right? So the fact that this starter deck, out of the 4 starter decks available, is the only one with a single blocker is kind of rough. But really the thing that I think hinders this deck the most is a lack of card draw. Unlike Digimon, card draw is pretty rare. There's only a couple of colors that can do it, but for the most part, each of the other starter decks has some way to, search for cards in one way, shape, or form. Some of them are better than the others for sure, but Red is the only one that has no ability to do that. So that's why I think it's a 2 out of 5. However, in terms of upgradability, that's a 5 out of 5. The first set, OP01, Romance Dawn, has a ton of straw hats to upgrade this leader Luffy deck. And honestly, it kind of plays into this interesting thing where using those set 1 cards, it becomes much of a mid-range control type deck that has Rush splashed in, thanks to Rush Zoro, as well as Rush Shanks from the set. So it kind of balances between this sort of control-y defensiveness, but also has enough Rush cards to really punch your opponent in the face. And then in terms of staple cards, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. So 6 out of the 15 cards are heavily used in meta decks, looking at Chopper, Brook, Sanji, Rush Luffy, Guard Point, and especially Jet Pistol. Now, of the remaining cards, there are 3 that have some flex considerations, looking at Nami, Robin, and Diable Jambe. And then in terms of, doing a leader swap of some sort, or creating essentially a new deck, right? Cards from this starter deck can be used in Rush Zoro decks, which is pretty good. Obviously Starter Luffy, or really any Straw Hat Matters decks, like, 2-color Law or 2-color Luffy. Overall, I would give this starter deck an 11 out of 15. I think it's really cool. I think it has great potential, especially once we get, the set 1 cards. But as it is right now, starter deck meta, it's personally not my favorite. But maybe it's yours. If it is, let me know why it is, and I would love to kind of hear your thoughts and discuss this a little bit further. And while you're down there, if you found this guide helpful, please consider giving a like and subscribing to the channel for more One Piece content just like this. We're going to be covering both the English meta as well as the Japanese meta, so I am working on a way to differentiate those, most likely in the thumbnail. You might have noticed it with this. In the top left corner, one of the corners will be like EN or JP, so that'll indicate which meta I'm talking about. But I'm excited that the One Piece trading card game is finally releasing in English, even if it's the super pre-release. I'm just psyched to have cards. So I'm looking forward to, creating more content and then hopefully doing some more gameplay once we have cards in hand and once there's a player base around me, potentially doing some, actual card matches as opposed to just tabletop simulator. So it's just a very exciting time to be creating content for One Piece. But anyway, I think that'll do it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And captains, remember, build what you like, play what you love. And I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good one.